Hi everyone, I am Praveen, working as Assistant Professor in the Department of Information Technology, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. And our today's agenda or today's topics are: what is virtual machine, what is virtualization, difference between host and guest system, and difference between host and guest operating system, and how this host and guest system is making the virtualization really happen. So let us move on to our actual concept of knowing what is a virtual machine first of all. So a physical machine is a computer like this, Windows. So everyone knows that the physical computer will have the CPU, the monitor, and the different peripherals of the computer, which is making a physical machine where we are calling it as a computer with an operating system being installed. And the operating system being installed in our example or the system is the Windows operating system being installed. Next, which has the CPU, memory, hard disk, and the network connection being existing. And if you look into this one here, we are calling it as a physical machine, and in the bracket it is mentioned as a host, as we are calling it as the host machine, right? So the physical machine with the CPU, memory, hard disk, and network connection, we are calling it as the host system. And in the context of virtualization, the physical computer is called as a host. So as we are studying about the concept of virtualization, so when we are looking into virtualization, we need to understand better about what is a physical computer in virtualization. So when we are in the process of looking into virtualization, or when we are in an intention to make our physical system have been virtualized, right? So at that point of time, we are going to call the physical computer as a host machine or host computer. So virtualization is the process of using special software on a physical machine to create virtual machine. So with the help of virtualization, right, what we are going to do, we are going to install a specialized software on the physical machine or host machine, and we are installing the special software in order to create virtual machine. So this is what it says: virtualization is the process of using special software on a physical machine to create virtual machines. So we are going to install a special software on this existing physical computer or physical machine or host machine, and we are going to create virtual machines out of that one. So virtualization, as we are saying, it is the process of installing a special software on a physical machine. So we have installed a special software on this one, and that special software being the Hypervisor, what is being installed here. So if you look into Hypervisor is a specialized software which is needed to install on a physical machine in order to create a virtual machine. So once the Hypervisor, a special software, is being installed on the host machine, here you can see a virtual machine is being created, which is nothing but the virtual machine 1, and we are calling it as the guest 1. So here the physical machine, we are calling it as a host machine, and virtual machine we are calling it as the guest machine. And the physical machine, on physical machine we are installing a special software called as the Hypervisor software. Upon installation of this Hypervisor software, a virtual machine is being created, and we are calling it as the guest machine. So physical machine and guest machine, or host machine and guest machine, we can say, right? So this is about the Hypervisor. So do remember that Hypervisor is a special software which is needed to install on a physical machine in order to create virtual machines. Next, a virtual machine VM is called a guest. So we can say that these virtual machines, virtual machine 1, virtual machine 2, we are calling them as the guest. And as we have here virtual machine 1, we are calling it as the guest 1 machine, and here we have the virtual machine 2, and we are calling it as the guest machine 2. This is the first virtual machine, and this is the second virtual machine, and we are calling it as the guest 1 and the guest 2 being existing in this one. And you do remember that once a single hypervisor software, especially software, is being installed on the physical machine, then we have the provision of creating n number of virtual machines. N number of virtual machines in the sense, according to the capacity of the physical machines, we can create the virtual machines. If so and so number of resources are being provisioned in the physical machine, then according to that, the virtual machines will be created to the maximum capacity of that one. So this is about the virtual machine. Okay, and you see here, the on the physical machine, you see, which is called as the host computer. Earlier we have seen the Windows operating system is been installed, right? So when we create virtual machines, we can have the provision of installing any of the operating systems on the virtual machines, right? So here, if you look into our example, with the virtual machine being one, the guest one, we have installed a software called Hypervisor, and with this one, on this virtual machine, we have installed the iOS operating system. And if you look into the second machine, we have the Linux operating system being installed on the second guest machine. So the host machine has the Windows OS, and the guest one has the iOS, the guest 2 has the Linux operating system being installed. And next, there are three important points to be remembered. If you look into this one, here we have another virtual machine which is created, virtual machine 3, and you have guest 3 where you have the Windows virtual machine being created. Here you have the Windows host machine, right? And you can have even another virtual machine with the different operating system also can be created. So this is about the installation of the specialized software called as Hypervisor, and how Hypervisor will facilitate in creating virtual machines with respect to the physical computer, right? So the creation of the number of virtual machines is purely dependent on the maximum capacity to which the physical machine will support in creation of virtual machines according to the resources being available. So here, as we are saying, the hypervisor is a software. So where are the hardware resources which will be supporting the virtual machine, right? So the same hardware resources which are supporting the host system, the physical computer what we have, the same hardware resources will be shared among the virtual machines for the utilization of resources. So virtual machine 1, virtual machine 2 and virtual machine 3, all these three will be making use of the same hardware resources which are confined with the physical computer or the host computer. Next, here we can create and run as many virtual machines as we like. So as we have said, right, we can create as many virtual machines as we require according to the requirements of the user, and we can run. So as long as their host CPU and RAM and other resources allow. So till what extent we can create the number of virtual machines? Till the extent the host machine CPU, the host machine's RAM and other resources will allow us to create or allow them to create the number of virtual machines. Next, the RAM is almost always the main limiting factor in the creation of the virtual machines, because the RAM size is confined to some extent, and according to the requirement, according to the maximum capacity of the RAM, the resources are being allocated, because the amount of space required in order to create the virtual machine purely dependent on the allocation of the RAM, even so that the applications need to be run with the help of it. So the RAM is almost always the main limiting factor in the process of creating virtual machine. So together, all the virtual machines share the same resources of the host. So all the virtual machines what have been mentioned, the guest 1, guest 2, guest 3 with iOS, Linux and Windows are going to share the same resources of the host machine or the host computer. So yet each virtual machine works independently. So even though they'll make use of the three, make use of the same physical resources of the host computer, each virtual machine will work independently, and they have their own limiting space and the instances being provisioned, and the other users are not permitted to enter into the virtual machine. Others virtual machines are other space in making use of the resources. So next, a second virtual machine is little more than a file sitting on a hardware. So the second virtual machine is just like a file sitting on a hardware, we can say that. But to users, a virtual machine appears and acts no differently from a physical computer. So even though it seems to a virtual machines, but for us who are making use of the resources in running your applications or projects with the help of the cloud environment, in this virtual environment, the host machine and the virtual machines will reflect the same. They'll provide the same sort of service irrespective of whether you're working on the physical machine or whether you're working on the host machine or guest machine. It doesn't matter for the user, and user will be in a frame of mind that he is working on the same physical machine as even though he is working on the virtual machines. So he won't find any difference in making use of the virtual machine. Next, a virtual machine can be configured to use not only a different operating system but also different type of CPU, storage drive or NIC than its host. But it can also make use of different types of processing capabilities. It can have different types of data storage and the network interface if you look into. So VMware provides, so here the VMware is the main software, or we can say that VMware is a company which is a subsidiary of the Dell International, and it is a big giant in providing the virtualization across the globe. So VMware provides the cloud computing and platform virtualization software and services. So if you look into this, if you have understood the concept of the virtualization, this virtualization is making the cloud computing happen. Without virtualization, the cloud computing is nothing, right? So the technology behind the cloud is the virtualization being existing. So VMware provides the cloud computing and platform virtualization software and services, and its desktop software runs on Microsoft Windows, Linux, and Mac OS if you look into. And it has the type 1 hypervisors that run directly on server hardware without requiring an additional underlying operating system. So what is this virtualization, right? Which has the traditional approach, individual applications running on individual systems, wastage of resources being happen, and applications are OS and hardware bound. So if you look into here, this image, we have the 5 different servers which are being running independently with independent applications. But how well the resources of these servers are being utilized to the maximum extent, where the resources are getting wasted. So in order to overcome that, we have the specialization called the specialized software called as the Hypervisor software, which makes the virtualization happen, where the wastage of resources will not happen, and applications and OS can be installed simultaneously on a single physical machine in order to make the virtualization happen easily, and the resources being effectively utilized, and the cost will also come down. So in computing, virtualization means to create a virtual version of a device or resource. So creating virtualization means creating the virtual version of a device. So if you are making use of some system, some laptop or a server or something, then we are creating the virtual device of the existing what you're looking for, such as a server, a storage device, network, or even an operating system, where the framework divides the resource into one or more execution environments. So you can make use of the server, you can make use of the storage, the network, and even an operating system with different execution environments. As we have seen in the example, we can install different sort of operating systems on different virtual machines with the different CPU speeds and with the different NICs, right? You can make use of them. So devices, applications, and human users are able to interact with the virtual resources as if it were a real single logical resource. So the users, with the help of the devices, right, can directly interact with the virtual resources in the similar way as we interact with the physical machine or physical resource. So even something as a simple as partitioning a hard drive is considered virtualized, because you can take one drive and partition it to create two separate hard drives. So you can, in a system, you can make use of one hard drive, and you can install a software called as Hypervisor software on it, where the hard drive can be divided into two separate hard drives with the help of virtualization, where the hard drive, the physical hard drive can be virtualized into the two parts or three parts depending on the requirements of the user. So the term virtualization has become somewhat of a buzzword, and as a result, the term is now associated with a number of computing technologies, which includes the following, where we have the virtualization. We can create operating system virtualization. We can have the application server virtualization, the application virtualization, and we can do administrative virtualization. The network can be virtualized, hardware can be virtualized, and the storage can be virtualized. So these sort of technologies, anything you look into here, the technologies what have been mentioned, the seven things, either operating system, application server, network, hardware, storage, and administrative kind of thing, everything can be virtualized with the help of the virtualization software. So the hypervisor. So we are talking about the virtualization, and the main software for creating the virtualization is the hypervisor. So let us see what is this hypervisor. A hypervisor or virtual machine monitor, so we can call it as a hypervisor or VMM in short we can say, which is called as a virtual machine monitor, is a computer software, firmware or hardware that creates and runs virtual machines. So a hypervisor is a virtual machine monitor, VMM, which is capable of creating a computer software, or it is called as a firmware or hardware. Firmware in the sense the combination of hardware and software, we can call it as a firmware that creates and runs the virtual machine. So do remember, whenever you come across a hypervisor, it is a specialized software being installed on a host machine to create virtual machines. So we can say that hypervisor is a VMM or virtual machine monitor, which is a computer software, firmware or hardware which creates and runs virtual machines. So a computer on which a hypervisor runs one or more virtual machines is called a host machine. This is the definition what we have seen. So the computer on which we have installed the hypervisor and which is running more than one or two virtual machines, we are calling it as a host machine, and each virtual machine we are calling it as a guest machine, as we have seen. And the hypervisor presents the guest operating systems with virtual operating platform and manages the execution of guest operating systems. So as the virtual machines have been created, the guest 1, guest 2, guest 3, as we have seen in our example, right? So the guest system will have the guest operating system, the host machine will have the host operating system, right? So if you have installed some Windows on the host operating system, you can install any sort of other operating systems on the guest operating systems, sorry, the guest machines, right? So if you have installed some Linux on the host system, even then you can create the virtual machines with the different guest operating systems being installed on the guest machines. So if you look into virtualization, we have this virtualization has happened with the help of a specialized software what we have discussed, which is called as hypervisor. So the hypervisors have been classified into two types. The one is the type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor. Type 1 hypervisor is called as bare metal hypervisor, and type 2 hypervisor is called as host OS hypervisor. So do remember, hypervisors have been classified into two types: bare metal hypervisor and the host OS hypervisor. And do remember the definition of or understanding how the hypervisor work. As we have said, it is specialized software being installed on the host machine in order to create virtual machines, and the machine on which hypervisor is being installed is called as host machine, and from which the virtual machines are being created are called as the guest machines. The host machine holds the host operating system and host resources, and the guest machines will hold the guest operating systems, and the same physical resources are being leveraged to all the virtual machines effectively for uh, the work. And the hypervisors have been classified into two types, type 1 and type 2, one being the bare metal hypervisor, the other one being the host OS hypervisor. So thank you one and all for. So this is about the concept of virtualization. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.